Everything okay?
Hi, I'm Christopher Landon, the director of Drop. I am here at IndieWire's studios in Los Angeles doing the Filmmaker Toolkit podcast.
I typically think of you as a writer-director, or in a lot of cases, a writer who's written stuff that other people have directed. And here you're directing someone else's script. I'm curious how it came to you and what appealed to you about it that made you want to direct someone else's material.
I mean, I think first and foremost, I'm not precious about how anything begins. And it's also why I still write for other directors, because I enjoy all aspects of it. But this project came to me, the producers, who are a father and son duo, Brad and Cameron Fuller, they brought me the script. It was a very early, if not, I think it was a first draft. They really liked the concept. They felt like I was a good fit for the material. I've known them for a long time. So they gave me the script, and I admittedly, I am a terrible reader of other people's work. And so I tend to be very slow, and I tend to put scripts down a lot and then come back to them over and over and over again. It takes me like a week, which is terrible, sometimes longer. But I read this thing in one sitting, like really quickly. And it just felt really, I'm very drawn to a clean and like sticky idea. And this movie had that for me. And so I saw a lot of promise and opportunity. And I enjoy working with other writers too. And I've produced some stuff on the side and have developed things with writers. It's nice to work with other writers, and I think they feel the same, because often you'll work with producers who don't have that kind of background. And so you'll get these really awful vague notes like, make it better. And you're like, oh, what the fuck does that mean? And so I got to work with Chris and Jill, our writers, really closely, and really develop the movie further. And so it was nice to be able to put on my writer hat and work with them to get the script to where we all felt comfortable making it.
What were some of the things the three of you worked on together? Like, how did it evolve from the draft that you initially read to what we saw on screen?
Right. It evolved quite a bit. I would say Violet's past and her sort of struggles, we kind of pushed forward a lot more and developed more. I had some kind of personal stuff that I wanted to put into that through some experiences of my own and some people I'm very close to. Henry was completely unconnected to the plot in their draft, and I felt like he needed more. Like, he kind of was just sitting there quite a bit. And so I really wanted to kind of involve him in the plot more. So that was something else that we worked on. There was the whole third act. The original script, the entire movie ended in the restaurant. I knew that I wanted Violet to have to, because it's interesting in the movies. There's a psychological threat, which is the person that she's dealing with on her phone, who's sort of tormenting her.
Yeah, you can order.
You sure?
Mm-hmm.
Big responsibility. How's the coconut calamari? Be honest.
It is our most popular special on the menu.
Great.
Well, I will get that started for you, and I will Violet.
Violet, everything okay?
And then there's the sort of physical aggressor who is at her house. I wanted her to sort of confront the psychological and mental part of her battle first, and then go home and do the physical battle. And that was something that I pitched to the writers and felt very strongly about. And I don't even think she ended up hanging out of the window in the first draft either. I think that was something else that we brought in. And then there were some twists. There were a bunch of twists. There's two in the movie that I came up with. One is the sort of big moment at the table. I don't want to spoil things. I don't know what to say. Where she outsmarts him. And then I also came up with the bit at the end with the payoff of the remote control car. I just love an out of nowhere moment. No matter how ridiculous it might be, as long as it takes the audience by surprise. I'll take a big swing that surprises me any day over like, I saw that a mile away and I'm bored. So yeah, so it was great. I mean, they're wonderful writers. And they were so collaborative and open, and it was just an easy process. Like there was no ego whatsoever, and that was just top down. Like it's kind of how I like to also run a set, where I want everyone to feel like their ideas are valid and can be heard and can be used, because I don't care where it comes from. I don't care where the good idea comes from. And I think when you create that kind of working environment for everybody, then I think you can always keep elevating something, because you're open to it, you're receptive, and it's not like my way or no way.
Well, you mentioning Violet and some of the changes you made in that character in the different drafts, that kind of speaks to something I really loved about the movie, which is it's an escapist movie about serious stuff. Like I felt like you did a great job of kind of presenting this stuff about Violet and her past of domestic abuse in a way that wasn't cheapening it, but also wasn't draining the fun out of the movie, which to me seemed like a very tricky balance. I mean, like how do you calibrate something like that without soft pedaling that stuff? And I'm not quite sure how you did it.
Well, I think it's something that I have always tried to do in the work, which is I do like to Trojan horse kind of heavy stuff into otherwise very entertaining movies. And like in the Happy Death Day movies, both 1 and 2, really wrestled a lot with sort of grief and loss, which is a sort of a top of mind subject for me and kind of goes into a lot of my work. Nobody wants a mouthful of bad medicine. It just all goes down easier if you're having a good time. And it still gets people to think and talk about this stuff, which I think is most important. No matter what I do, like I always employ humor and I always like to entertain. I grew up on a very, very steady diet of horror movies, but also just pop culture and a lot of fun stuff. And so that's constantly sort of what I'm reaching into. That's like my grab bag and go to. But I don't want it to be empty calorie. Like I do like to talk about stuff and have a conversation with the audience about meaningful things, but just in a fun way. And I think it's just about, you can kind of get away with anything in a movie if you can endear your audience to your main character. You know, if you're along with them, you can kind of put them through a lot of different kinds of tonal paces, I think, and they'll stay with you. I just think the cardinal sin of anything is just like a boring lead character who you don't connect with and relate to.
Well, and that's especially important in a movie like this, because I feel like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like essentially every scene in the movie pretty much is from her point of view, from your leads.
Very much so.
It's really intensely tied to her. Obviously, casting is always hugely important, but how much more important is it with a movie like this, where essentially, for the most part, one set, for the most part, one night, one person's point of view? How did you land on your 2 actors that were the 2 leads?
I mean, look, as a rule, I'm deadly serious about 2 things, and it's script and casting. And so I take every role very seriously. And it's why I take pride in at least what I think is the fact that like even sort of like ancillary backgroundy kind of characters still pop in my movies, because I genuinely care about that stuff. And so, but like in this particular case, yes, I mean like Violet is a very complicated character. The actor has to carry the entire movie. They're in nearly every scene. And so you need someone that has incredible range, stamina. You know, it was a tall order. And, you know, Meghann Fahy clearly rose to the challenge. I mean, I was a fan of hers, saw her, and obviously like everybody else, I came late to the party and really discovered her in season 2 of White Lotus. But I remember like that first episode where I leaned in and I was like, who is this? You know, and you have to kind of fall in love with your lead actor in some way. And I immediately did. We had coffee together, and there was just something about her that I found so grounded and charming, but still like there was vulnerability there, but there's still some strength. And I thought she brought that to her role, to her role in White Lotus. And I felt like this was a good match of actor and material. And that was just sort of on a gut level thing. But, you know, it's always tricky because you're, especially nowadays where, you know, a lot of people don't audition. So you're kind of crossing your fingers and hoping that they're going to be great. And you really do have to trust your gut more than anything. But I knew she was the right person. I could feel it.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the attention to supporting and peripheral characters, because that was the thing I really loved about this movie. Is to me, often the difference between an okay movie and a good movie, it's not the lead actors. Like the lead actors in any movie are usually going to be good. It's the direction, it's the background, it's the extras, and nothing can throw me out of a movie sometimes faster than bad background acting.
Yeah.
And this thing, I mean, like the background acting and the extras in this are just incredible because I was looking for it. I mean, the movie, it's this big restaurant. I was constantly looking around the frame at the other diners. It was always convincing. You felt like these people actually had stories. There was nothing that felt phony about it. And I'm curious how you approached that and like what kinds of conversations you and your AD or whoever was managing them had to make that so realistic.
It was definitely an all hands on deck approach. I mean, we all acknowledged very early on that like these are people we're going to be with for the entire night, and that they mattered a lot. And so we were really selective. I was really picky about because I chose every single background actor. I handpicked all of them, starting with like our amazing costume designer and her department. Like they helped us build characters. And we talked a lot about the kinds of people that would go to this restaurant. Are there people kind of like on, are they celebrating an anniversary? Is this kind of like a big night out for them, but like budget wise, it doesn't really fit their wallets, or are they like overdressed? And, we talked in great detail about what we wanted to see. I really wanted, like, for example, not too far in the background of our main table, there was a gay couple, and I was really specific about what kind of gays they were. And so we did a lot of work, on just that stuff. And then, of course, yeah, I mean, the AD department had an absolutely massive job because not only were they helping sort of wrangle all of that and manage that, but they were also, we had to create a timeline for the restaurant. And so like we had to know, and this was details for every single table, like what course were they on? What were they eating? Were they getting up to go to the bathroom? Are they getting up to leave? Like every single table had to get mapped out perfectly so that our continuity always matched. So that was a bear of an undertaking, and they really nailed it. I was so shocked because I thought for sure we would fuck that up a lot, but they didn't.
Given that you were shooting most of it on this restaurant set, were you able to shoot in continuity? And what did that give you?
That was a dream. And I remember telling the actors early on that I said, look, there's going to be pluses and minuses here. And I said, the huge advantage is we're going to get to shoot most of this movie in order. So you'll always kind of know where you are emotionally. And that was a huge advantage. And I know they both loved it, especially Brandon and Meghann. But I said, but the negative is, like, I have to make a movie about two people sitting at a table, and I have to make that interesting. And you're going to be doing most of that work for me, but I'm also going to shoot the fuck out of this. And so it will be a little bit of death by a thousand cuts. And it was because I knew that I wanted to work in sort of two visual modes at all times. And so we just covered scenes more than I normally would, because I actually don't like to do that. I think it starts to crush the spontaneity and sort of the energy of a scene. But in this case, we didn't have much of a choice there. So the actors really had to step it up quite a bit, especially Meghann, man, because she is in a constant state of anxiety and panic, and she has to hide it. And so the spinning plates of that performance is pretty astounding.
So explain to me a little bit more what you mean about like that you wanted it to be in two visual modes. Like what were the two visual modes you were thinking of?
So my DP and I, Mark Spicer, we talked about how I felt like because it's such a subjective movie in terms of like we are seeing this from her point of view at all times. So I felt like there has to be Violet on the date that's sort of performative, because that's what she's doing. She is performing for Henry at all times. And then there's Violet in crisis, dealing with her tormentor. And so when we were shooting stuff that was Violet performing on a date, we were in a very kind of conventional mode. So it was like very steady, and it was almost very typical, like traditional coverage of like, like a 2-shot and then like a single and a tighter single and things like that. But then when we went to Violet in crisis, I wanted the shots to become really sort of weird, kind of off axis. So there's a lot of Dutch angles and kind of movement, and it gets you a little seasick. And a lot of it too is about having to cover all of the messaging that's going back and forth as well. And so, we had to plan in advance where all of that text was going to go. And so we were always thinking about negative space and like, where do we place it? How big is the text? So all of that stuff we planned. So none of that was like, let's figure it out in post, because I was like, that's a bad idea. So there was just a lot of visual stuff to kind of figure out. And then on top of that, we had, because we were in the set and because I had total control of the environment, we obviously did a lot of specific lighting cues to kind of help direct the audience and help them be inside Violet's head as well. So that was another thing that was really fun to employ.
So that's an interesting point you bring up about the text messaging, because, something that I thought was cool about the movie too was that the ways you present the text, are kind of like amplifying the emotion she's feeling. I mean, where you're putting it, like you say, what size it is, what the font is, all that kind of stuff. I mean, what was the philosophy behind how you wanted the text messages to kind of add to the tension?
Yeah, it was like there was a decent amount of R&D that went into it once we were in post. Not because we didn't know where the text went, but because we wanted to figure out tonally what felt right. Because I didn't want them to be too loud visually, because I felt like that would be distracting and then it's pulling your eye away from the character too much. But also like wanting to figure out like, how does the text interact? Are certain words in color? How do they move? Do they fade? Like there's a moment in the movie where Brandon, our actor, walks through one of them and it distorts. So it was really fun playing around with it. But the idea there was, I wanted, first of all, to not look at a phone, because it's the worst thing in the world to have to shoot phone inserts. I think it's why most filmmakers avoid technology if they can, because it just sucks. But I wanted the text to start to feel like an actual conversation. And you need that text in the absence of a character that you're seeing who's behind it. You had to kind of create an identity out of it too. And so it was a little bit of a juggling thing, but I think we kind of landed on something that felt right, that wasn't too distracting, that kind of kept you engaged, that made it feel like she was talking to somebody. You could kind of feel their voice and feel the kind of a personality coming through as well. And I think that once you get to the reveal, it really adds up. So yeah, it was all those things, but it was really fun. It was like, I thought it would be way more daunting and annoying, to be honest, but I ended up really enjoying that part of the process.
Yeah, no, I thought it worked really well. And I kind of, as an audience member, went in a little, when I knew the premise of the movie, I kind of thought, oh God, I'm gonna be like, looking at a bunch of text messages for 90 minutes, this is going to be, but I thought it worked really well. And something else I thought worked really well about the movie is you do such a good job of acclimating the viewer to the space, to the geography of the restaurant. Like one thing I really liked was I always had a sense of where everybody was in relation to each other. And that's the kind of thing that if it's not done properly, also can kind of throw me out of a movie, because I'm like, wait, how close is so-and-so to so-and-so? And I'm curious what kinds of conversations you had with your production designer about just the design of the set. Like what kinds of things were you looking for that you needed to help tell the story?
Right. Susie Cullen is a genius. She and I, early conversations, it was really funny. Like we had that moment of like, oh, this is going to be great, because we both created Dropboxes so that we could share images, because she's in Dublin, I was still in LA, and we ended up sharing the same space to each other. Like we had picked the same inspiration. There's a restaurant in Philadelphia that we both felt like was a great template. And then once we got into the design process, it was about creating a couple things. One was like levels and layers to the space, because it just, I think, sort of helps visually. And it also kind of placed Violet and Henry in a very specific way, We talked a lot about just sort of the theme of the set and sort of what it's meant to really be. And we talked a lot about how I wanted it to feel like a gilded cage. And so when you look at the set, you'll see a lot of gold bars kind of reaching up and around people. It sort of covers different areas of the restaurant, but you start to get a sense that she's, in a weird way, very isolated, even though she's around a ton of people. And then there were just other things. Like I remember I pitched to Susie, like I wanted because the restaurant is such a character in the movie. So I wanted a dramatic reveal of the character. It's like almost like when you see certain movies and George Clooney shows up. It's like you always do the special, right?
Right.
So I was like, the restaurant needs that. And so I came up with the idea of the curved tunnel that connects the lobby to the restaurant because I knew that we could do a really cool reveal. It would open up to the audience. And I thought that was really cool. So yeah, it was just an enormous amount of work. And then of course, all the crazy planning that went into the set in terms of like what we would ultimately do with it later, which was a big, for a movie of our budget size, it was a bit of a miracle that we pulled off building that restaurant at all. You know, that was definitely a big, because it's big. It's a big set.
I'm curious, did you look at any other movies? Like there are certain movies that this reminded me of. I mean, you know, in certain ways, Rear Window, you know, Red Eye, which I know is a movie that you also, I've read, are a fan of, as am I. I'm curious, like, were there movies that you looked at to sort of see how other filmmakers had done this kind of thing to...
I avoid that like the plague.
Ah.
It's one of my rules. I don't watch similar movies for inspiration because I'm actually more worried about it kind of ultimately cribbing or stealing, but I file them away, you know, so I'm a hardcore Hitchcock fan. There's my second love letter to Hitchcock in my career, first one being Disturbia. So I'm obviously an avid fan. And then of course, yeah, Red Eye. And Red Eye specifically because I love that movie. And in the past, I don't know, I've heard some people shit on it a little bit and I'm always like, but it's a great movie. And like Wes made two people sitting nut to butt on an airplane intense. Like that's hard. That's like a master working. And I've always been a giant Wes Craven fan. And also there was this weird kismet kind of thing at play here because I was supposed to direct another type of Wes Craven movie that didn't work out. And then this movie was already kind of there in the wings. And I kind of felt like, oh, this was the Wes movie I was supposed to make, not that other one. And it just felt like fate, you know? Yeah, but like Red Eye, huge inspiration.
Now, it sounds like you were saying, you kind of, in the script and in prep, kind of, you know, you didn't want to leave a lot of stuff for figuring out in post. So you were kind of working out a lot of the stuff, whether it's the texts or just when and how to reveal information and all of that. You know, it sounds like it was probably planned out pretty carefully ahead of time. But I'm curious, when you got into the editing room, this is a movie that's so delicate in terms of when it lets people in on things. I mean, it's like, again, just does such a great job of keeping the audience guessing about who in the restaurant is the one sending the drops. And I'm curious if when you got in the editing room, if you found as you were showing it to people that you had to kind of finesse that. I mean, was there a trial and error in terms of figuring out when and how to reveal information, or did that come more easily than you expected it to?
The latter. What was interesting about this movie that was very different from anything else I've ever made is that ultimately when you're in the cutting room and after you show it to people, you know, you start to kind of get a sense of what feels a little superfluous or like the fat. You start to really look for the fat. And sometimes it's whole scenes that you just chuck out of the movie. And here, I think just by design, it was so tightly constructed that it really didn't allow for a lot of wiggle room in that regard. So it's not like we left anything on the cutting room floor, to be honest. Like there was like there may have been like an establishing shot here that we felt like, oh, we don't need it. But very little was cut out of the movie. There's a lot of fine tuning and that kind of very microscopic finessing that happened throughout the process. And, you know, when I work with my editor, Ben, we just keep watching the movie over and over and over again on our own. And then, of course, we start inviting people into the edit and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's weird. Like I would say that my first cut of the movie did not change very much to what is going to be in theaters.
And what was the approach in terms of using sound design? What did you want sound to do for you in the movie? I
mean, again, you know, because the movie's so subjective, I wanted it to work to put you in her head, you know? And so, you know, sometimes it's about, and a lot of it had to do with background, you know, like sort of the sounds you hear in a restaurant, you know, like when we wanted to kind of ramp up the anxiety, sometimes it was about tuning up the sound of metal, like forks and things, like clanking. Sometimes it was the absence of sound and removing all of it, you know. And then a lot of it too was just trying to keep it really grounded and alive, so sometimes it is that like burst of laughter from table 4 or, just little details like that that I found really powerful and useful. But I think mostly just sort of trying to put you in Violet's head.
I guess, to wrap up, I'm just kind of curious, you mentioned the producers of this, but it's Platinum Dunes, but then also Blumhouse, who you've done many great movies with, including Happy Death Day, as you mentioned. What is what do you think makes such a productive relationship between you and Blumhouse? What do you give each other that you think these movies, because I feel like it's pretty consistent. They're all really strong movies, all the things you've done with them.
I think foundationally it's trust. One of the things I love most about Jason Blum is that he is not risk averse. And I think he's created a business model where he can be more bullish in that way. But I like that about them. There's an indie kind of spirit to the way they operate that I think is really cool. They put their faith in every filmmaker they hire or work with. And that just means autonomy, which I think is priceless. Like I would choose a, $10 million Blumhouse movie any day over a $200 million juggernaut, whatever IP thing where like you have 900 people to answer to, because I just don't feel like that's what cinema is for me. Because I want to feel a filmmaker's imprints on something. I want to feel their personality coming through the work. And so Blumhouse really honors that. And so they don't ram shit down your throat. Like, notes are optional. Like whenever I would, give them a script, they'll give me notes, but it's take it or leave it. And if you don't agree with something, you don't have to do it. And that goes for when you're editing as well. I've never been forced to make a change I didn't want to make. And I think that's pretty rare. So I think that's the reason why I think so many of us go back. It's just that you feel respected and that you have freedom to make the movie you want to make. And they kind of get that. And if it flops, so be it. It's on you. It's on you, which is the risk of it all. Like I don't get to blame anybody else when they don't work. But it's just nice to have that freedom.
So do you have any idea what you're doing next?
Fuck no. I guess in my sort of slightly older, well, definitely my older age, I've learned to just be really like to slow my roll and not like get seduced by the shiny things that sometimes appear depending where you are in your career, because I've had a lot of ups and downs. But I always just try to find stuff that, feels like a movie I'd want to go see. That's really like the baseline of everything that I read is like, does that feel kind of cool and fun? And is there something I can say there? Am I drawn to the characters? Or if I'm just writing it myself. I really do put myself in my own little movie theater whenever I write, and I don't really care about anything else.
I really enjoyed this one, so
Thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with me
It's my
about
pleasure.
it.
It was
So,
awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Chris.